everybody, it's Luke at Young Writers here, and I am here today with Mrs. Katherine Woodfine. So how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not bad at all, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good. So let's get straight into it. For people that don't necessarily know who you are or mega fans, I always like to ask this question just so it's in your words. But could you allow us to step into your world? Who is Katherine, and what is it that you do?
So I am the author of quite a few different books for young readers, but probably the ones that I'm best known for are my Sinclaire's Mysteries and Taylor and Rose Secret Agents books, which are all historical adventures, mysteries, set at the beginning of the 20th century. So in the Edwardian era, the sort of period just before the First World War. And yeah, they're just stories that are full of adventure and mystery. They've got young detectives, they've got friendship, they've got lots of historical details if that's the sort of thing that you're interested in. And yeah, hopefully they're just a lot of fun.
So I actually have a question on that. So as you said, most of your books or all of your books are based on or in like a historical time, era, period, themed. Firstly, why did you pick the era that you have written about, which is generally, as you say, like 1910s, before the war kind of area? And where was the idea of like the historical fiction from?
Sure. So I've always really loved reading historical fiction. I don't know, there's just something about the way that those books kind of take you away to like a time and place that feels very different. I guess it's almost like the same reason that lots of people enjoy reading fantasy. Is because it sort of feels like it's like really sweeps you away from your everyday life and into this really different world that you kind of like explore and learn about. So yeah, I love reading historical fiction. So I thought it would be really fun to have a go at writing it. And I'm a bit of a nerd about like the historical details as well. Like I love finding out about all of that stuff, and especially all the sort of like everyday details, like things like what people wore and like what they ate and all of those like day-to-day little things that I think can really bring a historical book to life. Like that's the sort of thing that I like to find out about. But in terms of the sort of Edwardian setting of the books, I was sort of drawn to that really because I realized that when I was growing up, I really liked reading a lot of those like classic children's books, you know, things like The Railway Children by E. Nesbit or The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And I realized that lots and lots of those books were all set in this quite like small little window of time that's sort of after the Victorian era, before World War One. And like we all kind of remember what that kind of story world is like. You know, everybody's got a petticoat on and they're having like buns for tea. And like it's a really it's kind of really vivid in our imagination from the children's books that we all read. You know, things like Peter Pan, Wind in the Willows are all set in that time. So I thought it would be really fun to write a children's book set then, partly because of that, but also because I was sort of surprised that although lots of contemporary children's writers were writing books set in the Victorian era or set during the war, not many of them were writing about that little bit of time. And so I just thought, it would be really fun to see a new children's mystery story set in this Edwardian period that we kind of feel like we all know a little bit and we kind of enjoy exploring.
I mean, everyone has their niche, and I think one of the things that we always say is to do what you love, of course, but also write what you love and what you know. And I think everyone has their, you know, if you love writing, you generally will have like another passion that kind of comes into that, whether you like writing, as you say, like sci-fi, or if you like writing diaries or reflective things or whatever that may be. You know, it could be about the war, as you say, it could be anything. So it's always good to bring that. And if it's about what you love and it's about what you know and what you enjoy, then it's always going to come hand in hand with your skill in writing. But
I couldn't agree more about that. And I think your enthusiasm really comes over in writing. So if you're passionate about whatever it is you're writing about, you're excited and inspired by it, then, you know, that comes over on the page and the kind of reader feels your enthusiasm. So yeah, it's such a good place to start.
I mean, it comes from love, really. Even you know, writing itself and the passion and the joy comes from what you love doing. And so putting those together will just make it even better.
Yeah.
But to kind of go back to the start of your journey, you know, your journey has been very English based, which weirdly, what everyone may not know or may know, I don't know, is, from what I've seen and experienced, actually a bit more unusual for a writer. I've always found that writers, authors, you know, like Cressida Cowers, had kind of had a journey where either they, when they was younger, they never thought they would write, they never really read that many books, or just went down a different road. And whereas, you know, you said that your first job was in a bookstore, and then you went on to study English at university, and then you went on to write a book. And weirdly, that is unusual. It's good, and you know, but you don't often find that. And that's why, you know, we always try and say it's never about what you study. You never know where you're going to end up. It's just about doing what you love. But also, you did that from a young age, which is fantastic. So do you want to maybe tell us a little bit more about that end of things?
Sure, yeah, of course. No, and I think you're so right. Like, and that's something that I always try to say when I go into schools. And a question that I'll often get asked is, you know, did you always know you wanted to be a writer? You know, have you always loved books and reading? And actually, for me, the answer is yes. Yeah. Like, I absolutely loved books when I was growing up. Like, my favorite places were like bookshops and libraries. Like, you know, I was the sort of kid who was always getting in trouble for reading when I was meant to be doing something else, like doing my homework or like going to sleep or whatever. So, you know, books have always been my thing, and I always knew that writing was something that I really wanted to do and I wanted to explore. But as you say, that is far from the case for every writer. Like, you know, there's many writers out there who will go down a very different path. They might not discover their love of books or writing until much later. So yeah, it really varies, and there certainly isn't, you know, any one single path to becoming a writer. So I think that's a really important point to stress. But yeah, for me, I have always loved books, and I spent a lot of time as a kid and also as a teenager, like just doing a lot of writing for fun. Exactly as you say, I just did what I enjoyed, really. I wrote a lot of diaries. I wrote a lot of stories for myself that kind of like were quite epic and would go like on, and the characters would kind of have one sort of adventure, and then they go and have a totally different sort of adventure, and it would end up being a totally different thing to what it started as. You know, I'd write like plays and stuff to put on at school. I worked on my school magazine. Like, basically, if there was something that you could do that was to do with books and writing, I was like, yes, me, I want to do that. So yeah, and I think that is important to say as well, because if that is your thing, then yeah, 100% embrace it, because I think it's all of those hours of practice that I spent during that time exploring different things, trying out different kinds of writing, you know, just following that interest, really, that is what led me ultimately to being a published author.
Yeah. It's nice to get both stories as well, honestly. You know, it's really nice for someone to say, I never thought I was going to be a writer. I never enjoyed reading when I was younger. And then, you know, it kind of hit me and I enjoyed it and I loved it and I ended up there. It shows that, you know, the possibilities are endless and you don't have to have everything figured out. But also then we look at your story and it's really nice because you loved it. It's what you wanted to do. And then through the hard work, it happened. And so it just reinforces the very much idea of, you know, put your mind to something and do it, or don't put your mind to something and just do what you love, and hopefully things will work out in the end. So it's good to get both sides, and it's a really nice story, yours, you know.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there are different paths as well to through different forms of creativity, you know. So I was always very drawn to words and books. But I think sometimes people come to writing from different directions. So, you know, you might come to it through music, for example. You know, if you're interested in music, you come to it writing lyrics, and, you know, that takes you on the journey in that way. Or, you know, you might even come to it through like visual art. You know, maybe you like art, you like graphic novels, you like illustrated books, and that's your way in. So I think, yeah, it's really important to remember it doesn't have to be all about, you know, what you're doing in English class at school, or that you want to sit down and write a poem. You know, there is loads of different ways into loving writing and to loving books and texts and stories. So, you know, film is another great one. People are interested in like film and video. Yeah, there's loads of routes in, and it's just a really fun space to like get in there and explore and enjoy.
You know, it's nice to know that there are lots of routes in as well. So if you are out there and you're watching this and you want to write, then there is a way, always, I think is the key takeaway. But, you know, we look back at your earlier journey and how you got here, and then we look at now as well. So we move to now. And the latest book is Nightfall in New York. There we go. Which is the fourth and final installment of the Taylor and Rose Spy series. So do you want to give us a bit of background information about the series? Because maybe not everyone's read the first three and we can try and wean them in.
Yeah, sure. So this series, Taylor and Rose Secret Agents books, is a sort of interesting one because it's actually a follow-on series to a previous series I wrote called the Sinclaire's Mysteries. And that is a historical mystery series about a group of friends, in particular, two young girls called Sophie and Lil, who sort of solve various mysteries in Edwardian London, and they sort of discover this talent for detective work. And I wrote 4 stories about these characters sort of solving these mysteries. It's kind of Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie, a little bit of famous vibe in there as well. And at the end of the series, I sort of realized that even though that story was complete, I wasn't kind of quite done with these characters. And I found myself really interested in the idea of like, well, what might happen to them as they get a little bit older, as they sort of grow up a little bit, and maybe they develop this detective talent that they found, and take it in a new direction. And about the same time that I was thinking this, I was doing a bit of reading about the sort of historical background, and I discovered that something called the Secret Service Bureau was first established in around the time that these books are set. And that was at the time this very small, like sort of secret government department that nobody knew about. But out of that little tiny kind of office with just a few people in it became what we know today as MI5 and MI6. So basically, it was the beginning of spies, the Secret Service, you know, James Bond, all of that. You can kind of trace them back to this time in history. So I thought, what if my characters use their detective skills and basically become awesome, globe-trotting, Edwardian secret agents? So that is what happens in this series. So there's 3 previous books, and they both basically, each book follows Sophie and Lil, Sophie Taylor and Lil Rose, hence Taylor and Rose, to different cities as they kind of go on various sort of like espionage adventures. So the first one, In Peril in Paris, you know, they're off to Paris, they go to St. Petersburg, they go to Venice, and this is the final book in the series, Nightfall in New York, and they go across the Atlantic Ocean to New York in 1912, April 1912. If you know anything about the history of important things that happen on boats in 1912, you might guess some of the sorts of things that might happen to them in this story. But yeah, it's a book for anybody who enjoys sort of espionage, spy kind of adventures. There's a bit of sort of like the Alex Rider kind of James Bond type of story in there, but it's also very much a story about friendship. You know, the 2 girls in it are, you know, great friends, and that's really important to them in solving their mysteries. There's loads of sort of real history woven in there, things about what was going on in New York in 1912. And for readers who've been following this story over 8 books now, I hope it's also just a really satisfying ending to the story of these characters as they kind of like grow up and embark on this like new stage of their lives. So yeah, end of an era, really.
I mean, they are cool books because they draw from a lot of things. As you say, you've got the historical side of things, and you've got the spying and the espionage, and that links to the history of, you know, what you said earlier, MI5, MI6, which is really cool. And then you've got like the wanderlust travel where they're traveling through Europe in Paris, St. Petersburg, Venice, and then, you know, out of Europe into New York. It draws from a lot of things, and I would say there is something in there that everyone will possibly love to kind of to plug it a little bit, but it does draw from a lot of inspirations and kind of cover a lot of ground, and it's, you know, it's fast paced, it's really cool, it's friendships, it's good for that age as well, and it's quite inspiring too. And yeah, it's a great book.
Yeah, I hope so. And I think inspiring is a good word, because I was sort of really interested in the opportunities that were kind of available for young women at this time in history. You know, if you go back a bit to the Victorian era, the expectations of young women were quite limited, like what they could do, their opportunities. But at this time in history, things are really opening up. You know, the suffragettes are kind of active and making the case for votes for women. Women are having opportunities to be educated. So I thought it would be a really interesting opportunity to see these kind of like young heroines kind of going out, exploring the world, you know, finding things out about themselves and about how the world works. And yeah, hopefully that is something that young readers can be inspired by too.
Yeah, and it teaches a lesson, as you say, around that area, and with 2 young girls trying to explore what it was like at the time. It kind of gives you some historical idea to, you know, what children can read now to see what it was like in the past. And so it's inspiring and it's important. So very much worth the read. I have one final question that is somewhat of a deeper one, possibly for those out there that do kind of want to write or chase that a little bit further, but what is one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self if you could go back in time? And that could be career, writing related, that could, it could be anything.
That's a really interesting question.
Kind of throwing in your deep end there, but
yeah, no, I think if I could say one thing to my younger self, it probably would just be to have a lot more confidence in myself and what I wanted to do. I think I did know really as a teenager, like what I wanted to do and where my passion lay. But I think that I was like often a little bit apprehensive or unsure, or would like question myself, or would be like, feel like that was something that wasn't for me. Like I grew up in the Northwest, in like, I didn't know people who were professional writers. Like that wasn't really like, I didn't really come into contact with people like that. We didn't often have writers to visit the school or anything. So it felt very out of my grasp. And I think sometimes I didn't have the courage of my convictions to be like, no, actually, this is the thing that I want to do. I should just go for it and be confident that this is something that I can do. So yeah, I think that if I could give myself one piece of advice, it would just be that, like, don't worry about what anybody else is saying. Don't worry about like what's going on around you. Like, you know what you want to do, just do it. Yeah, which hopefully is something that lots of us can relate to, I think, as we try to go and do these things. But yeah, so I think it would probably be that. And in terms of advice for other young people who want to be writers, the one piece of advice that I always try to give everybody, well, it's kind of two pieces of advice really. One is just to read loads and loads, because the more you read, the more you learn about how to tell good stories. I mean, it's just as simple as that. But the other one is, and it kind of ties into what the advice I give myself, but it's like, don't worry too much about your writing being perfect, because your writing often has to be kind of a bit rubbish before it can be good. So it's like you have to get the sort of bad first draft down on paper that you're just like, oh, this is terrible. What am I ever going to do with this? And just, get it down, get the ideas down, and then you can like refine them and improve them and get them better. And like, don't judge yourself on that first draft.
Yeah.
Because that's not the finished piece of writing. That's just the starting point. And then you can like turn that into the finished piece of work, what you want it to be. So yeah, those are just throw in there a couple of pieces of advice for anyone watching.
I mean, very true. And they're perfect. I think one thing that resonates with everyone, and especially in this day and age, is that truly anything is possible, and it's now so much more accessible for everyone. You said when you was younger, you didn't necessarily have like writers in school and stuff, and it's really important to have that like in-person connection or story. But with things like YouTube and social media, and we can now watch things like this on YouTube and see these talks and have these conversations where people out there that may not have that opportunity can kind of get it from somewhere else and learn, and that's what's really important, is that to anyone it really is possible to do whatever. So sell out the stadium, write the book, discover the vaccine, I don't know, whatever it may be, but truly no,
absolutely. And I mean, I'm showing my age here, but I would have absolutely loved that. Like, we didn't have social media or YouTube or anything, but if we had, like, I would have absolutely loved that opportunity to get on there and connect, not just with seeing professional writers, but also with other young people who were as interested in books and writing as I was. So yeah, it's awesome that there's all of that out there, and it's just there to be embraced, really, I think.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for chatting with us. I'm sure it's really useful, and hopefully it kind of inspires some voices out there to get writing and send someone down the right road. Nightfall in New York is out very, very soon, so make sure to grab it. Spies, espionage, traveling, wanderlust, it's got it all. History, what more could you ask for? Yes, well, thank you so much.
Thank you, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Well, have a great day.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.